interesting because in the school, for example, when Sunnyfields was told we're going to have to go into lockdown soon, but before that, the messages about COVID-19, we actually scheduled hand washing. So children had to go and wash their hands, and they went as a communal group and, lined up behind the sink and washed their hands with soap and encouraged each other, and sang songs or counted to 20. So it was a fun issue, but it's slightly different now at home, because if you're sitting in one corner, you might not need to wash your hands as frequently as you did in school. But you find that some of the children are quite anxious. They're sort of like, oh, we haven't washed our hands. We haven't washed our hands. I mean, in extreme cases, that can lead to some kind of, compulsive disorder, because you're constantly washing your hands because of this fear of disease, right? Bims, you're holed up with 3 children of different. How are you finding the sibling conflicts and tempers flaring, or you even losing your temper with them because you've got things to do and you're getting more and more impatient?
Well, one good thing is that because I've sort of established a schedule for myself and a routine, yes. I encourage the children as well to have a routine and some kind of agenda for the day. It's rather flexible so that
right.
we don't get in each other's spaces so much. And when we've established where we're going to work and things of that sort. So because we have a schedule and we've made sure that we don't overlap our spaces wherever it is that we have created them in the house. We don't have so much of the quibbling or arguments. Someone may be working and the other one takes a walk, or someone is working on a project in one area, and someone else is doing exercise or so. So we try to just make sure that we are not on top of each other all the time. The other thing to notice too is like when I pay attention to what their behavior is like, so that if someone becomes a little moody, or I just notice any negative behaviors and things like that, I have to practice a lot of patience at this time. And because regressive behavior really is a sign of the child trying to go back to something that they are more comfortable with. So the parent should not look at it as a
coping mechanism.
It's a coping mechanism. And so the parent really needs to look at take the regressive behavior, whether they're throwing a tantrum or there's some kind of mood change. They should look at that as though that child is actually asking for help, because they actually what they want to do is to feel in control. Because this COVID-19 thing is so unfamiliar. It really is nothing anyone ever expected. We need to help the children to develop a routine, which is what happens at Sunnyfields. The children have a regular schedule of things to do. The teachers are patient with the children, and they recognize that children are trying to develop some sense of autonomy, which helps their learning development.
Okay, thank you for that. And I mean, one of the things you mentioned there was, about making sure that we observe their behaviors. Sometimes, actually, we're seeing behaviors that we didn't notice before, because frankly, the children weren't in the house.
Yes.
I mean, for younger children, when you speak about regressive behavior, we know, for example, that at Sunnyfields or in the nursery section, tenderfoot, you have children who are sort of like age 3.5 or 4. They've got a little baby brother or sister, and this is their space, right? So at home, they've been under pressure because suddenly there's somebody else sharing the attention of their parents.
Yes.
But now they come, they can come to the nursery and claim their own friends, claim their own teacher, and so on. But now they're forced to be at home. And what might happen is that you find that 4-year-old suddenly decides he's not going to be potty trained anymore, because the little one is getting more attention, having their diapers changed. And it's very easy to sort of lose patience and say, for goodness sake, little Johnny or whoever, you were potty trained, you're not supposed to do this. But we have to distinguish between what is going on and whether it's attention-seeking behavior or also a feature of anxiety. So like you said, The structures and routines have been broken, like we say on the next slide. And their usual social cues have, vanished. This is not what we were doing before. And then suddenly, this space that I came to, where maybe I came home and I had a snuggle with my nanny or my brother or whatever, suddenly all that's disappeared. So like you said, the routine has disappeared. So we've got to really look at what we can do within the house to restore this. But remember, children are also very clever. So you have to be very, very careful that you're not being manipulated into doing certain things, right? So a lot of the support that you're giving the child has to be almost like saying, okay, you've conformed now, so you get a reward. Because if you're trying to establish new structures and routines and new rules and boundaries, like on the next slide, these are things that we need to pay attention to. So what are the supportive actions that we can take, right? The key thing is communication. We've got to be talking to them. We've got to be listening to our children. We've got to be finding out what is actually going on. And we have to acknowledge the anxieties. So some of the things might seem a little silly to us, but that is the child's truth. So for example, you've got somebody who's college bound, who's worried about, Binta, I imagine this is probably happening in your house because you've got a college bound student who's now saying, I'm never going to have a prom. I'm never going to wear a prom gown or whatever it is you do in America. Can you talk a little about that? Well,
one of the things it is that right now we're kind of like banning the language of never, and it won't happen, or it's impossible, or it's cancelled. The language I prefer to use is suspended or postponed. So that's postponed, actually, okay. Yes, postponed or is suspended. That allays the anxieties, and it kind of brings down the disappointment or anything, the high levels of disappointment that the students might have. The same thing with my students who are online. They say, "Oh, I guess I'm never going to see you again." I said, "No, you will see me. It's just, okay. You will see me. It's just being postponed." So something as simple as even the language that you use in the house is for you to make sure that it's positive and it is something that is uplifting, so that the children have a sense of hope and it's not diminished. Okay, and thank you for that. And one of the things that we've done at Sunnyfields in Tenderfoot was the teachers actually started recording messages for the children and sending it off to the children. And the children's response to that was amazing, because I guess, at some point in your life, you think only your teacher knows anything. And, you do spend a considerable amount of your formative years with your teachers, and just receiving messages from their teachers saying, "Oh, I miss you. I look forward to seeing you soon," and things like that really, really cheered the children up. The other thing I wanted to mention is you spoke about exercise and about going out with your children. I think sometimes when we're in lockdown, depends on if you're lucky enough to have a garden, fantastic, you can go out into the garden. But if as we are here in Lagos, you're in lockdown and there is no such thing, you can take out time within the routine of the day to say, let's dance, let's, put on some music, let's sing to it, and all that. And that seems to do a lot to cheer people up as well. When forming schedules and routine, it's always a good idea to try and mirror as much as possible what the child would have been doing in school, because right now we're trying to transition into online learning. So those boundaries and routines that we set up have to mirror to some extent what is going on in the school, in the real world, so to speak. One of the people I was talking to yesterday was saying that their daughter, who's at school in the UK, is now in Lagos, but has resumed online teaching online learning in their school. And it starts with them having to wear their uniform, having to go to assembly,
I mean, it all sounds, I mean, it's a truncated assembly, but they have to go through this routine so that they feel that they're in touch with reality. Because I think, Bimpe, you mentioned it earlier, it's very difficult when you're doing online learning to get motivated.
It is.
And not to spend lots of time over the, lessons that you are having. One of the key things that we like to put out is that any lesson should not be more than 30 to 40 minutes with maybe 10 minutes breaks. And not everything about learning is just about the core subjects. Make space for baking, for doing other things, for reading actually. And,
yes.
but as you said, the important thing is to establish a proper learning routine so that the child has a schedule to adhere to and something therefore to, boundaries and deadlines.
And just to piggyback on something you said is that, making sure that you have a schedule and making sure that there's a time for learning and there's a time for fun. Something that we kind of overlook is that for younger children, their time, it's not necessarily bad that they have any kind of technology in front of them, but the maximum recommended amount of time for them is 20 minutes for the day. But even when they have that 20 minutes, it's not that they're watching a program or they're working on their iPad by themselves solo. They still need for that 20 minutes to be interactive. So the parent has to be engaged and present with the child. So if it's reading something, they need that recursive feedback. Oh, this is good. What shape is this? What color is this? And the child doesn't want to interact with a computer or with a screen necessarily. They still need that modeling from the parent or an older sibling who is in the house, who is helping them to learn something. So for those children who are like from ages 3 to about 6 or so, their interaction with technology has to be very involved. It can't just be two-dimensional.
Right. Thank you very much for that. And I mean, that just brings to mind the fact that once we all talk about online learning for older children, that's great. But then our younger children are still illiterate. So somewhere along the line, we still have to build their core literacy skills, their maths, their English, their reading, their writing. And all that can't be done through online support. So there are lots of online reading programs, like Sunnyfields uses Headsprout. And then, I mean, there's lots of clubs as well that one can find online with quizzes, etc. But speaking about online, I was reading somewhere a rather disturbing fact that a lot of online abuse has gone up in recent times because now web predators find it easier to get their prey because, of course, everyone is stuck at home. So there is something to be said for ensuring that especially older children who have access to computers, that there is enhanced stuff for web safety, that, everybody, has
I mean,
they take the usual precautions.
Yes.
Right. I see there's a poll going up now. So just because, we want to know a little bit more about the people who are online. So just that will take you about 10 seconds to complete. So that's great. Okay. Sorry, Bimpe, did you want to say something about the web safety?
Oh yeah, I was saying that parents should also, at this time, it's important not to necessarily, while we are trying to tell children to be careful with people they're interacting with online and what they're saying online, we also have to realize that this is their main mode of communicating. So because they